Absolutely. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello again and good morning. My name is Dania Matos. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I am the Associate Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer at UC Merced and a very privileged and honored NADOHE NorCal member. First, I want to thank Dr. Mary Wardell Garaduzzi, who is an incredible leader. And when I called her and said, I'd love to do something, can you partner with me? We were able to do this. Again, I want to welcome you to the inaugural NADOHE NorCal Summit at UC Merced. And with that, our Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz, couldn't be with us in person, but sends some video welcomes that we'd like to play for you right now.
Hello, I'm Juan Sanchez Munoz, Chancellor of the University of California, Merced, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of UC Merced, its faculty, staff, and students to the NADOHE 2021 NorCal Summit. As a founding caretaker, original board member, and inaugural co-director of the NADOHE Professional Practice Institute, I feel a deep pride and excitement at hosting your 2021 summit through our campus. The University of California has long been an exemplar of inclusive excellence, as has been NADOHE and its development of chief diversity officers in higher education. And the recent past has proven again and again the relevance and need for the work of NADOHE and the work of the professionals in this space of inclusive excellence. Imperfect as our collective efforts have been relative to the full and complete instantiation of inclusive excellence across the landscape of higher education, those of us committed to this work persist intrepidly, hopefully, collaboratively, and resolutely toward a more perfect union of opportunity, equity, and inclusive outcomes for all. The summit will be joined by a number of nationally recognized leaders in diversity and inclusive excellence in higher education. I congratulate all of those who have been part of the planning and development of today's events, and I look forward to hosting this group again, physically on our campus, once circumstances allow us to all be back together and even further rededicated to leading higher education toward inclusive excellence. Thank you, and have a wonderful summit.
I also want to note that our Chancellor was one of the founding members of NADOHE, so this is really a full circle moment for us to be able to. I also heard him invite you all to join us when we are on campus, so we hope to be able to extend that opportunity and just welcome you in person, physically distanced and with masks, but certainly in community as we are today. With that, I want to also acknowledge our provost, Greg Campfield. Provost Campfield, I know you weren't asked to speak or anything, but of course I always afford you the opportunity. And so if you want to give a wave or say anything, thank you for being with us as well.
Well, and thank all of you. I really appreciate your being here despite the challenges of Zoom, and I appreciate your work tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you. Provost Campbell is an incredible partner of this work, of my role and of equity, diversity, inclusion here at UC Merced. With that, I get to introduce our chapter president, Dr. Mary Wardell Garaduzzi, who is a seasoned executive leader, professor of communication and leadership, and best-selling author, serving the California higher education community for more than 25 years. Starting in July 1st, she is going to serve as the inaugural Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of the Pacific, still keeping her role as chapter president, which I just confirmed. Dr. Wardell Garaduzzi is an expert in building strategic and lasting organizational capacity for equity, love, and social justice. She was reappointed by San Francisco Mayor London Breed to serve as the president of the San Francisco Public Library Commission. And in 2018, she helped the organization with the coveted National Public Library of the Year award. For the past 10 years, she served as the inaugural Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of San Francisco. Known for her servant leadership, she won the Most Influential Woman Award by the San Francisco Business Times in 2017, and she won the Hero Award by the San Francisco Human Rights Commission and the Changemaker Award by the African American Historical Society of San Francisco. Currently, Dr. Wardell Garaduzzi teaches race, diversity, and leadership to graduate students in the USF Schools of Management and Education. to prepare today's corporate and nonprofit leaders for the difficult yet necessary racial equity and social justice work ahead. She founded the DEI Leadership Group, LLC, a crisis management, diversity solutions, and leadership development practice based in San Francisco. And that wasn't enough. In 2020, she released her first book, Twice as Good, Leadership and Power for Women of Color. Just from a personal standpoint too, I want to say Dr. Wardell Giraduzzi has been a phenomenal friend. I started this role and moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, also an inaugural role. She's been a champion, a resource, a mentor, and a friend. And with that, I welcome Dr. Mary Wardell Giraduzzi.
I feel so loved this morning. This is a morning of just Friday love. It is so good to be with you, and it's so good to be here together, is it not? This is in Northern California, NADOHE, the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education. Northern California is one of the most richest regions as far as talent and scholarship, a community of practitioners that is deeply committed to these ideas of equity and social justice. You know that Northern California, in many ways, has been the seed of justice and imagination for the rest of the nation. Oakland has been the seed of the revolution, literally, and it continues to be. But San Joaquin County and San Joaquin Valley and the places and spaces in which even University of California, Merced, and many of us are located, has been places where people have been thinking deeply about what does justice mean? And it's happened in among workers and laborers. But then we have university leaders and community practitioners who are thinking deeply about this as well. So I bring you greetings from a region that has really gifted not only California, but has gifted the nation with thinkers, with activists, with people who understand that the pursuit of happiness and life and liberty should be extended to all and not just some. We know that the work that we do on our campuses is critical. It is not work that sits on the peripheries. As a matter of fact, our missions cannot be fully realized without us continuing to do the work of understanding what does equity mean now, and how do we go about using the promises of our institutional missions so that all students, all faculty and staff are able to fully participate, but even more so, how does our research inform the policies that policymakers, legislators, that business community, industry leaders will need? And so the work that we're doing in the classroom, helping faculty think deeply around the racialized pedagogy, even if they happen to teach in a STEM area, helping our administrators think deeply about their own personal equity formation and what that means in the work that they're doing for their for the community, the campus community. Everything we're doing, it doesn't matter if you're in student affairs, if you're in enrollment management, if you're a scholar practitioner, or if you happen to be in a research lab. Everything that we do for equity and social justice is actually making the country a more perfect union, as your chancellor has said. I just want to say thank you so much to Associate Chancellor Matos. Danya is a powerful as well as good person. And you see Merced is clearly has blossomed from her leadership. I want to thank you so much, Danya, for having the vision of this. She contacted me last fall. You know, we're in the midst of the pandemic, and she says, Mary, I'm thinking about doing a summit. I said, go ahead, do it. And then her team has pulled this together. I want to thank Provost Camfield for being here and his support. We will take the chancellor and the provost up on your offer. I've been to UC Merced at least one time when at the University of San Francisco. Your prior chancellor invited the entire team of the University of San Francisco management team, the senior leaders. We all came there some years ago. That's been a while, so it'd be really wonderful to have the NADOHE colleagues to see just how much Merced has grown, right? And I heard that there's a new hotel in the area as well. So thank you so much. much for creating the space of learning, discovery, so that we all can become more thoughtful in this work of being a practitioner for righteousness, practitioner for social justice, being a researcher to think about how do we center the voices of those that have been marginalized in our communities. So once again, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your moving, touching, and inspiring words. If only we could start every day with that and with your leadership. But and thank you for being so supportive and such a visionary. You've got a lot of congratulatory love on the chat, so I hope you're able to absorb that and take it with you. And I know the NADOHE members, we are always rooting you on. With that, I am going to turn it over to our inaugural Deputy Chief Diversity Officer. A personal journey. I started my work in higher ed as a Deputy Chief Diversity Officer myself. So to have it be full circle and be able to hire one now is also really inspiring as we continue this work, as Mary said. So with that, I introduce Cynthia Cortez.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to join you this morning. Quite excited. Thank you, Danya, for the introduction. Thank you, Mary, for the words. And thank you, Chancellor, for the message. So I'm very, very grateful and excited to get our journey started. So I will share screens to show slides. Please confirm you're able to view them. Thank you, Danya. So welcome to the 2021 NorCal NADOHE Summit, Leading Higher Education Towards Inclusive Excellence. I'm very excited to be here to be able to share the story of UC Merced and our journey towards establishing the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. To get started, I'm going to invite my colleague Onar Primitivo, Executive Director of Equity and Justice, to lead us through our land acknowledgement. Onar?
Great, thank you, Cynthia, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Appreciate that it's also a Friday, right? This is a great community, a lot of things to be shared. And so I wanted to share with you all our UC Merced land acknowledgement. Local indigenous people, including the Yokut and Miwok, who understand the earth as a place for everyone, first inhabited the land where UC Merced is located. When we address diversity on this campus, we do so boldly, daring to look forward and backwards, imagining diversity's demand for the 21st century and the importance of diversity in addressing past wrongs, reaffirming humanity, and ensuring a reconciliatory path of redress for the future. The most prominent path on campus is called Scholars Lane. By day, you can see and hear, witness, an embodiment of our diversity through campus community. Community members making their way across campus, framed by the slopes and peaks of Sierra Nevada. And part of the work, especially with this campus, as OEDI leads and collaborates and partners, is the land and labor acknowledgement reflection. So throughout the day, through the many different guests and presentation, is ask yourself these two questions. What intentions do you have to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond this land acknowledgement? Then the other is, what is your organization doing beyond acknowledging whose land and labor allow you to live, work, and or learn in this space, right? And also as we find joy as an inhabitant of the Yokuts and Miwok. So just going through the day, wanting to challenge you all, right? And to reflect on that. So thank you, and I turn it back to Danya.
I think it goes to Cynthia.
Oh, it goes to Cynthia, I'm sorry.
No, not a problem. So to provide an overview of today's summit, here's the agenda. One, we're going to go over what the process has been like to grow an EDI office. We will then follow with understanding the transformative practices and innovative approaches to this work. Following that, we'll have an opportunity to listen to our campus EDI champions. They have prepared a presentation for everyone here today. I'm quite excited to hear them and continue my learning process. Following that, we'll listen to next steps, what is happening in our world, and some things you can anticipate in the near future. All in all, our hope is to show the NADOHE network what an innovative example looks like for higher ed when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So to get us started, we want to talk about the journey. What does it mean to become this office? What has it been like? And to ground us in that work, I want to get started with a little bit of our mission statement. Our mission statement for UC Merced reads, opening in 2005 as the newest campus of the University of California, UC Merced continuously strives for excellence in carrying out the university's mission of teaching, research, and public service, benefiting society by discovering and transmitting new knowledge and functioning as an active repository of organized knowledge. As a key tenet in carrying out its mission, UC Merced promotes and celebrates all the diversity of all members in its community. And with this clear statement in the mission, in addition to our diversity statement, our principles of community, it becomes really important to understand the grounding our mission has with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'm going to pass it over to Danya to walk us through what that journey has been like.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And folks, we welcome your participation. I see the chat is active, so if there's any thoughts or things that come around, please let it know. So coming into an inaugural role, I know some of you may be walking into that yourself, or frankly, reshaping and reimagining what this work looks like. For us, we were a campus that in our inceptions and genesis, we already had a lot of underrepresented students. We were built in the San Joaquin Valley to serve the community here. And so pre my arrival, also cognizant that I am standing on the shoulders and the work of others with that. There were a lot of passionate EDI efforts as we talked about there was a need to centralize them, right? As most institutions, the de-siloing, but also giving visibility, amplifying, and providing that sustainable structure. That was really critically important. So coming in like most, I wanted to do a listening tour. For us, we doubled the size of campus in 4 years, called the Merced 2020 project. And that's something I heard a lot about. And so coming into the inaugural role in 2019, I really did a kind of play on words, and the listening tour was called 2020 and Beyond, Building and Thinking Forward, right? So how do we build the physical capacity of campus, but the people, right? How do we build our people in that same development and encompassing all our people, including the local Merced community? And so from that, we emerged and engaged the community in that. It was also a strategic listening tour that involved the local campus community, which, some plans are doing nowadays, but not all do. And so I certainly encourage that happening. It builds really great community relationships, and also folks here that you're doing that. We had 3 different sessions co-facilitated by faculty and staff. That is, I was just an active listening participant. I was not at the forefront and center. And being a research institution, we really grounded that in qualitative and quantitative research, including conducting focus groups about that. From that was born our BobCAT ideas framework, which I believe we're going to go into a little bit more later, and really building that out, both from the inside with the listening tour and from the outside with an external review. It's so important to engage the community, have touch points with them. We had continual cyclical feedback for them, sort of, this is what we heard. Did we get it right? If not, let's be flexible. And so that was really critically important in our journey. Next slide, Cynthia. So out of this emerged our mission, which is people first, anti-oppression for all. So really thinking about the next evolution of this work, right? We started with multiculturalism and celebrating days, weeks, months, years, moving to diversity, but in some ways really looking at how that's become sort of a buzzword, how we need to be specific in what we mean to create the specific solutions. So for us, it really moved towards a framework of equity, justice, and inclusive excellence, right? So what are the structural barriers? What are the things that are really keeping those barriers from keeping people from thriving? So developing that clear sense of mission was really important for us. I often talk about developing equity-minded practitioners. That is to say, training is performative, education is transformative, right? Kind of the bell hooks. The purpose of education is to engage folks in critical thinking. And that's what we're doing here at UC Merced, right? Not just going with a 1-hour training, but thinking about that development of our folks across the spectrum in that. Grounded in the work of Paulo Freire, so the quote on the bottom reads, critical consciousness is an active and persistent curiosity and awareness that examines beliefs, practices, assumptions, and norms to detect how power and privilege operate to contribute to inequality and oppression. So that critical consciousness lens is the key and one of the tenets of our work here. Go ahead, Cynthia.
So our diversity statement is robust. It stems from the University of California's diversity statement. And at Merced, we have it on our website, forward-facing, accessible to all to read. At UC Merced, we steadfastly uphold the concepts expressed in the University of California diversity statement, including the variety of personal experiences, values, and worldviews that arise from such differences of culture and circumstance. Such differences include race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, language, abilities, disabilities, neurodiversity, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, geographic region, and more. It's vital that the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion looks at these different identities and lived experiences through that intersectional lens. Otherwise, we miss the opportunity to bring in justice in a way that's appropriate and that's responsive to the different histories of our communities on campus. This diversity statement allows us that North Star and vision, and it's anchored back to our mission statement. So as OEDI develops its programming slates, its services and opportunities to engage our campus community, driving those efforts and intentionality is our commitment to diversity, because we want to foster the ability for everyone to thrive given the many complexities. So for us, having this diversity statement anchored in our mission statement is a critical event. Because if we don't have this to ground us, if we don't have this available to everyone on campus, how then do we build that shared understanding, not only for the UC Merced community, but also for our broader Merced and San Joaquin Valley? And one thing I really like to highlight here is that our particular diversity statement is available in English, Spanish, and Hmong, representing the communities on campus. So we anticipate and look forward to the opportunities to translate it in all the languages that we can to ensure that everyone within our region and beyond is able to access and understand the unique approach we have towards diversity. Passing it back to Danya.
Thank you, Cynthia. Also Mandarin. So for us, it was important to survey and create language access and accessibility as one of those. How did we grow the office? All those tenets that I talked about of really grounding it in the research and what the community needs really evolved with the roles that we have now. As you know, NADOHE also has so many examples and resources of the standards of practice and what's necessary to develop. It was really important to have graduate student researchers. And so they are involved in that development and that transformative practice of engaging in the research of what it's like. As most of you know, this work could also be the setting of a lab, right? We are the lab and where we're testing, and we ebb and flow with the changing zeitgeist of the people in the community and the times we're in. So really thinking about this work and our roles and commitments to that has been critically important. I talked about the hiring of the deputy CDO, which has been sort of great. The director of equity justice really working on sort of those initiatives and campus partnerships has really been important. And the analyst, right? So a new hire that we really focus on the accountability, developing the metrics, developing the dashboards, and having that sort of statistical analysis. It's also a role that works really in conjunction with our institutional research department, so that there is that synergy and that constant cyclical information going back. And of course, the executive assistant, who without whom nothing would happen, is definitely a critical role in these spaces. And so to see this grow, this is just sort of the outcome in under a year, because I have not been in my tenure a full 2 years yet. In under a year, to see all of this happen and grow really based on the needs of the community has been really rewarding and inspiring. I wanted to talk, I've referenced this a little bit before, but with the external review that we conducted. So this was happening at the same time as the listening tour. The listening tour was the internal reflective feedback. The external review, like this community of NADOHE, I was able to lean on the University of California system of chief diversity officers to come in and provide that expertise analysis. Forever indebted to them. It's one of those groups that's really rewarding, as is this one. So when you're thinking about what are the pieces that we can sort of, this is the reflected from the inside, this is what's seen on the outside, where they meet and where they intersect is part of the grounding and how we're going to build this work. Next slide. Perfect. And so we talked a little bit about the BobCAT ideas framework. So at UC Merced, we are proud BobCats. And so we wanted to catalyze that experience and ideas in the framework and in our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategic planning. For us, it really is, how do we move this needle towards equity, justice, and inclusive excellence? And for us, it's through the acronym of our BobCAT ideas, which are community, right? Really learning that community extends beyond campus. So everything we do and everything we frame really involves that. When I talk about some of our signature events, you will see that we invited community members to sit on our task forces to really know that their experiences are valued and engaged, and then that we're listening. Creating that access, right? We often think about access kind of in the people with disabilities space, but we're talking about access in its broadest forms. I talked to you about language access, accessibility committee, which is one of our affinity groups, but this is really about thinking about equal and equitable opportunities for all. Transparency. If you've had the opportunity to check out our website, we post all our work we do. We record our town halls, we reflect back. We also provide the opportunities for consultation. So nothing is hidden, and we wear the work we do, and we also own if we misstep. And so I think that's really a key component of this work. Inclusion. As you know, so many of us may have that title in our roles, but what does it truly mean to cultivate that sense of belonging? For us, it's really started with some of our work in the People First work group, and really developing the campus experience surveys, not just in surveying, but the action planning that comes behind it. On the diversity, all people and perspectives drive our inclusive excellence. Yes, that is all people and all perspectives driving that, and us being very clear about what it means to do that, including the equity piece of removing the structural barriers. So for ourselves, and the role of the analyst has been critical in disaggregating that data, right? Not having just the broadest sense of things, but also thinking about when we say, and I can say that Latinx, right? So what do we mean? As someone who identifies as a Black Latina, it's really important for me to see all the experiences in these federal categories that weren't created by us. So how do we count in ways and measure in ways that really value our people and that they want to see and hear, and that it reflects everyone, so we're not missing anything, has been really important. And that also lends itself to the last framework of accountability, owning our progress and improving that trust and responsibilities. Oftentimes, we move so quickly in this work and so much is happening that we haven't even had time to pause and show the community what we're doing, or develop that graphic, or have that town hall. So for us, is really a part of immediately being able to post it and share it out, but also have that disaggregation. So I'm really excited to have our analyst, Wendy, on board to help us do that along with institutional research. Go ahead, Cynthia. I've talked a lot. It's your turn.
Thank you, Donnie. And I appreciate setting that foundation, because it does take a lot of conversations. It requires assessment, listening to our campus community, our faculty, our staff, and students to build something like the BobCAT Ideas Framework. For us moving forward, this framework heavily influences the mechanics of our work. So sometimes you get to see us forward facing, our events, our premier services, our ability to join you perhaps in a work group or a committee, but behind the scenes, in order to attain that level of excellence and that aspiration to ensure that we're responsive, we wanted to take an opportunity to highlight some of the mechanics of our work at OEDI. So we're very grateful to have been able to build out our communications branch. When it comes to getting the good word out there about the nature of the conversations, some milestones that we've obtained in community, we have our newsletter called the BobCAT Brief. Has a tremendous amount of resources, insights. It uplifts the work being done around campus, because our hope and intent is to serve as a repository for all EDI related efforts on campus, to ensure that we're responsive to the global, national, local events that are connected to justice or the lack thereof. ACCDO Matos is always on the pulse and thinking about those writings and remarks that remind everyone in our community our stance towards justice and our commitment to speak against injustices and racism and anything oppressive that horrifically impacts our community on campus. We use our different outlets ranging from social media to our website to resource guides to ensure that these opportunities, toolkits, resources, definitions are available to all, because we do know that not one office or one person can do this work alone. So how can we make sure that we're making it accessible, as we saw in our strategic framework? In regards to campus feedback, it's also vital that we gather this information, but continuously listen. We want to make sure that we are responsive. We want to make sure that we're actively listening, we're listening inclusively. So the different opportunities we've had include our CDO's office hours, our different opportunities to listen via meetings and surveys to understand what's actually happening on the ground in live time, and also thinking about our campus and institutional data regarding climate, our compositional diversity, and just understanding what capacity do we have to carry out EDI work. All in all, we know that each community needs different things. So for us, it's vital to ensure that our responses, our engagement is tailored to faculty, staff, students, and our community. So when it comes to these specialized spaces on campus, one of the key things coming out of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion are either committees that we oversee, task forces that we convene, or work groups that we're a part of. And the slide here highlights some of them. I'll invite Danya to talk us through some of our Chancellor Advisory groups, some of the amazing work being done there, and a little bit of our affinity groups. Danya?
Thank you, Cynthia. So yes, the Chancellor Advisory groups predated my arrival, and you can see sort of the three that we had. One of the things that we quickly instituted was they were meeting independently alone, and I quickly formed the Diversity Collective. The Diversity Collectives brings all three groups together. It also creates that synergy of what is the intersectional work that can be done. Oftentimes you'll find that groups are working on their own, doing very similar mission and goals. Is there opportunity to influence campus climate, culture, and inclusion, queer issues, and the status of women as they influence each other? The Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion's affinity groups. Affinity groups were previously under our human resources, bringing that sustainable structure as well. Oh, it's so great to see some of our staff members. I see that popped in the chat. Hi. Our affinity groups move them under our purview to, again, build that sustainable structure. Not only, I often talk about a commitment without currency is counterfeit. So we brought that currency to our commitment, but we also brought that same stature, opportunity, and intersectional lens. So affinity groups and chancellors and advisory committees are able to meet and talk about the different ideas and pressing issues and concerns that they are uniquely positioned to address, all under the scope and purview of this office. The newest affinity group being the Black Alliance at UC Merced. We also recognize that this work is not the work of one, nor the work of one office. And so our committees and work groups are really across campus doing incredible work. Our quantitative science biology department has an equity, diversity, inclusion work group where they're running the gamut of everything from, the GREs, but what's the graduate student experience? What's pedagogy and curriculum look like? We are a part of all of those pieces. Our inclusive excellence work group, also something we're proud to be a part of, and you're going to hear more from them later today with Dr. Hatton and the Police Advisory Board. So bringing that lens of the BobCAT framework that I talked about earlier today is a key tenet and component of continuing that thread of inclusive excellence that builds the quilt that is UC Merced. And I think we wanted to sort of highlight here, Cynthia, I don't know if you want to also jump in on this, please do so. Our commitment to engage all campus constituency groups. Many of what you're seeing on here are inaugural. They were birthed during the pandemic. And so that is to say our virtual dialogue series is something that we wanted to continue to bring that professional development to our community in different ways and able to highlight and champion voices. We bring different models of both internal speakers and external speakers speaking together, building the community of researchers together, and also offering them at different times. One of the things we quickly learned during the pandemic is people are not engaging work at the same times or in the same ways. So it was really important for us to offer different times and opportunities to be able to engage the biggest breadth and depth of folks. Our Dialogues That Matter series, we just kicked it off with our anti-Semitism, but it was something that we were also able to fund with a grant. And it's a longer 2-hour workshop where we lead those equity-minded practitioners with the tools that do that. You'll often hear sort of difficult dialogues, courageous conversations, but the thread of all of that is what really matters to people, what's really on their minds and their hearts. And that's something that we've engaged in and created during that. We also wanted to find ways to recognize and do and nominate folks from our community so our Equity and Justice Awards are those different pieces. And the last component that you'll see on the screen is our Reflecting on Anti-Racist Pedagogy, or ROAR. We like acronyms in academia. You're going to hear from Dr. Canfield later today, and that's been wildly successful and something that we also are going to continue on through those partnerships.
Thank you. It's so vital that these different opportunities to engage, especially during a pandemic, to foster this sense of community. We know that our charge is clear to really think about how do we cultivate these transformative practitioners on campus. But one of the key things that come across these different premier initiatives and opportunities is building relationships with each other. The role of healing and sense of belonging that shows up has been very intentional about how these spaces have been crafted. So the variation of opportunities come from this idea of how do we ensure that, again, what have we heard? How do we make responsive programming, but also in this theme around making sure that people first. So all of this undertone really honors the different lived experiences and identities of our campus community. And we have a few that have been absolutely pivotal for OED&I. And we have a couple of highlights we want to share with you because they were just so grand in scale, in collaboration, and need. So the first one we want to highlight is our signature initiative, the Valuing Black Lives Task Force. This is a two-piece part of an experience. One are the petitions and opportunities to engage with our different campus leaders regarding what it is that we want to see. And the second half of this task force are the subcommittees that provided recommendations. But I'm gonna pass it over to Danya to provide a lot more contextual detail. So Danya, by all means, chime in.
Absolutely. I'm really proud of this work. Like all of you, the murder of George Floyd and the reckoning with this country's legacy of slavery caused us to be in action, right? Caused us to send something beyond the statement. And so in our statement, we birthed our Valuing Black Lives Task Force. As you can see, we engaged all different constituency groups, from Senate and non-Senate faculty, to our staff, to our administrators, to our alumni, to our students, to our campus community members. In just 4 months, they developed recommendations that went to the chancellor and provost. I was one of the administrative co-leads of this work, along with the academic senate chair, Dr. Robin DeLugan, and our dean of students, associate vice chancellor, Dr. Jonathan Grady. We developed a report of the structure and how to sustain this work that went to the chancellor and provost, and that is going to continue on through our Valuing Black Lives initiatives. 5 different subcommittees. We explored policing and anti-Black violence. As many of you know, that is continuing on. Community engagement, research scholarship and funding, staff and faculty recruitment and retention, and student support. I would like to say that this was also in close work with the Black Alliance, having that constantly feedback and loop, not only at the administrative co-lead level, but at the subcommittee level, where the voices were engaged. There was no development of ideas for people, but it was by people. And that was really, really powerful and important. We have this all on our website if you want to see more of the details and the recommendations, including the recorded town hall where we presented those recommendations. I invite you to do so. And our next slide, I'm really proud of, and I'm going to invite our graduate student researcher also who led this, if she wants to, but I do want to acknowledge Maria Ramirez Loyola, who led point on this. But we received a grant from the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. And for us, as you know, free speech and hate speech and how they intersect have been at the cornerstone of some of the most complex issues we've navigated in higher ed. For us, it was really important to bring this to our campus community and engage in different topics in different ways. The theme was, can speech truly be free? And this is sort of a snapshot of everything we did. As you can see, we launched the week with free speech and hate speech, but navigated different topics. Free speech is a human right, which really took us to the global setting of who this is, how this shows up in everyday life from our student life administrators. We had a keynote, and we also, our provost held a town hall on navigating issues of free speech and academic freedom within academia with our graduate dean. So again, this is something that was highly successful, but the crux of it being, how do we bring tools to that development of our transformative practitioners? Maria, I don't know if you want to say anything. I am kind of putting you on the spotlight, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Danya. I think one of the things that was really important is that oftentimes, we talk about these issues, but not everybody has that working knowledge, perhaps, of how these terms are defined and how perhaps those definitions vary across different spaces, like higher education and other areas. So providing that foundational knowledge that we could use as a scaffold throughout our various sessions. So it's like a skill building workshop sessions, I think was really important and really helpful as we were navigating and learning how to have these difficult conversations, in our classrooms or in our campus life and across various areas of higher education and beyond. So I was very excited to take the lead. It was very helpful and informative. And yeah, thank you to all who attended. And I'll throw it back to Danya.
Thank you, Maria. You did a phenomenal job. I'm cultivating new chief diversity officers, so I hope Maria is one of them, and we'll see her as a member of NADOHE soon. Cynthia, go ahead. I think this was your slide.
Yep, this is it. So as our community has seen today, a tremendous amount of work has been done, both forward facing. In this particular event, it's our dialogues that matter. So you'll see a screenshot in our Zoom meeting, but also the work that requires multi-session engagement like Free Speech Week, the work that requires deliberation and deep conversations like the Valuing Black Lives initiatives. And again, the task force, the committee, the work groups, in addition to our capacity and ability to listen to our campus. So all in all, as Donna mentioned earlier, a lot of this work took place during a pandemic, right? During a pandemic where a lot of us are going through life, dealing and responding to our family needs, dealing and responding to our professional needs in the workplace, trying to figure out how do we continue to provide excellent education to our UC Merced community. So what we've learned and understood during the pandemic is, again, going back to our vision statement, people first. And how do we make sure that that blended approach, that value shows up in everything from our lunch and learns and dialogue that matters to all of the premier initiatives that are coming downstream. So I hope that what was shared is powerful. I hope that it's inspiring a lot of thinking and questions. And we do want to provide Danya the opportunity to provide just general reflections as we reach this milestone. We're closing up the academic year, but there's a significant amount of insights learned and wisdom imparted. So Danya, by all means, how do you make sense of this experience?
No, absolutely. I was going to open this up. This is where we hear from you all as well, because we know we're all kind of experts in this field. And, one of the things I often checking back, that really critical piece of checking back in with the community as diversity officers in higher ed, we have expertise, absolutely. But we also know that everyone is experts of their own experience, and listening to those voices and really cultivating that community care. And I love that Dr. Wardell's Giraduzzi's intro had love in it. We often forget about love in the practice of higher ed. We often forget about love in these spaces. And so leading with love and being a people raiser, right? People first was something that we conceptualized as the pandemic work groups were started. And one of the things I noticed is they were all operational. And I was like, where's the people? And so sure enough, People First Work Group was born, and it lives on because we are really doing that and thinking about anti-oppression. With that, I'll open up to your questions, reflections, your own expertise and insights. And thank you for allowing us to share a little piece of what we're doing. Follow us up on the journey. We're rooting you on, and we're happy to have you with us.
Well, I'm going to give a comment because I'm not sure if everyone caught it in both Cynthia's and Danya's and the rest of the team's presentation. Danya came to UC Merced in 2019. And I think it's really important for us to understand the way that this work has been built out, because I do think that this is a beautiful framework. Even if you have an existing office that has been around for 5, 8, 10, 11, 12 years, whatever it is, if you happen to have been one of the campuses that did this work early, I think there's things that we can learn from UC Merced, because what happens is that when you have a campus that's deeply committed, as you see Merced has been, and then if you have a leader like Danya come in, they're able to take advantage, if you will, of the things that those of us that have been doing this work in some of our offices for maybe over 10 years, the best practices, the best thinking. I can remember less than 5 years ago, people were not talking about that this work essentially was love work, that we were trying to teach people fundamentally, that we were trying to find liberation, particularly for those who have not had any sense of liberation. And liberatory spaces was not the terminology. I remember 10 years ago at one of my first meetings with some folks, I started talking about equity. They thought I was talking about equity in the house, so they thought I was talking about, financial equity. And these people had vice president in their titles. They had been working in higher education for a long time. So what I'm saying is that UC Merced is, in my mind, is a brilliant example of a young office with a visionary leader that has gotten it right from the very beginning. I think there's things to learn from that. As they're going through this period of reflecting over the last 24 months. And I think there's something for all of us to think about, because yeah, I've been around long enough when people didn't know what equity meant. They really thought I was talking about. I remember, and someone told me in a business officer said, people did not know what you were talking about, Mary. I said, okay, so I know how much work we got to do here. But we're in a place now that people understand those things. They understand disparities and disproportionalities. That racism is structural, that it's in the DNA, it's in the walls, in the fabric, and that we then have a duty and a responsibility, right? So I just want to say it's beautiful, beautiful framework. And even I am going to take some of the things that I've heard, particularly Cynthia, you have a beautiful energy. Some of the things that I've heard you say to incorporate in some of the work, even as I begin my term at Pacific.
Thank you so much, Mary. It is love work, and one that you led with, and so appreciate. I see our provost's hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Danya. And thank you, Mary, for framing it that way. One of the things that I have noticed I've been at Merced since 2007, almost from the beginning. And it is a labor of love, and it's also really hard work. And so many people are committed, and they work where they are. And often it's lonely. You don't know what progress is being made. You know the resistance that's in front of you. You don't know the community to support you in that. And I think that is, to my mind, the most important thing about the work Danya is doing. She's knitting us together. She is weaving this fabric across the institution. So none of us doing any work in any pocket feels alone anymore. I mean, I'm very proud of all of the different grassroots efforts at diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice that have popped up on our campus. But I'm also acutely aware of how fragile grassroots efforts can be if they're not cultivated, if they're not watered and fed and nurtured. And I think that's the really wonderful thing about an office like this, is it allows us to think much more holistically and have a much more powerful sense of belonging in this difficult work.
I love that, Provost, right? The isolation, right? The tears of joy, the tears of hurt, the tears of pain, all of that, and just speaking to your humanity. I think that's oftentimes something we talk about, and for those in meetings with me, I often bring up, what about the people, right? Are we thinking about all that? And that's not to say people aren't, but having at the forefront. And at the end of the day, it really is grounded in love work. Mary, I think I'm going to get a t-shirt, because I mean, that was really quite powerful. With that, we're going to shift a little bit, because I think we are a little over time, and my deputy's going to keep me up. So how do we ground that in our partnerships as well, right? Our partnerships in love. And it's really manifested itself in such a beautiful way of the humanity of UC Merced. And with that, I'll turn it over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Danya. So I will resume slide sharing. By all means, everybody take a stretch break, take a moment, because we're going back into slide mode, but with a lot of amazing speakers to join us and really add the richness to the work that's been done in partnership throughout our campus. So 1 second to get this slide share up and running again. Please confirm that y'all can view it. I need some kind of thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you, Danya. So to give an overview of our partnership segment, we know as the theme continuously comes, we cannot do this work alone. There's a tremendous amount of expertise throughout our campus. So when we think about how do we centralize it, how do we share this common language, any opportunity we have to engage with each other is a welcomed opportunity. So I'm quite excited for this portion of our summit. I'm going to introduce our Executive Director of Equity and Justice, Onar Primitivo, to walk us through who's going to be presenting today. Onar?
Great, thank you, Cynthia. Ooh, when you say my name with correctly, ooh, that gives me goosebumps. Thank you. So yeah, so we do have four presentation, and as we have established that, you know, we don't do this work alone. We partner with champions. So we have our Dr. Eileen Coggle, who will be presenting on building instructor capacity for anti-racist pedagogy. And so just want to give you a little snapshot of our presenters, right? So Eileen has a degree in English and a graduate degree, master's in EDD in higher education. Since 1997, she has been an instructor, curriculum designer, faculty pedagogy coordinator. She spent 5 years as a director of a university writing program, which includes chairing the developmental writing department, overseeing the Student Writing Center, and leading faculty learning communities for writing in the disciplines. And next we have Dr. Jorge Arroyo, and the title is Broadening Pathways with Undergraduate Research Program. And a little bit about Dr. Arroyo serves as the Director of Undergraduate Research Opportunity Center, or UROC. We love acronyms at UC Merced. And as the Director of UROC, Jorge Arroyo closely works with staff and faculty to support our students to be better prepared for graduate school admissions process and enroll in advanced degree programs. As a first-generation college student from the Central Valley himself, Jorge understands the barriers for students to understand and ultimately pursue a post-baccalaureate education. And then our third is our own Dr. Nigel Hatton, and the title is Equity as the Beautiful and Just. And as an associate professor of literature and philosophy, Dr. Hatton, an associate professor, faculty in philosophy at the University of California, Merced, was born in Keesler in Biloxi, Mississippi, and raised in South Carolina, Arizona, California, Virginia, the Philippines, and Germany. So we might have some kinship there, Dr. Hatton. He received his BA in English from Virginia Tech and an MFA in writing from the Jesuit University of San Francisco, and a master's in English from Virginia Tech. And MFA in writing, MFA in writing, Jesuit of San Francisco, MA in Master's in Latin American Studies, and an MA in journalism from University of California, Berkeley. And through that in modern thought and literature from Stanford University, and a dual PhD in thought and literature, humanities, and political theory, and also from Stanford. And then our fourth one, exciting, is our own Armando Contreras, who will be serving as the interim Dean of Students. And the title is Dean of Students, Efforts Moving Beyond Diversity to Create Equitable and Affirming Learning Environments for Our Students. Armando is a leader, educator, researcher whose objective revolved around facilitating student learning, a self-advocacy rooted in social justice, and provide critical lens on lifelong pedagogical learning for students, staff, and faculty, and works to promote the importance of diverse, equitable, and inclusive practice in education. Armando earned his bachelor degree in Chicana Studies from UCLA, earned his Master's of Arts in Education degree from California State University, Long Beach, and is currently, this is why so proud of Armando, his final years of his degree from educational doctorate in education policy, organization, and leadership programming, focused on diversity and equity in education from University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. So that's what we have for you in terms of our panel. And now we get to listen to all of them, and please give a round of applause, show your love, and I give it to Dr. Eileen Canfield.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. If not, shout or shriek, and I'll make sure I've unmuted properly. It's wonderful to be here to talk with you all about the partnership between the Center for Engaged Teaching and Learning and the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to sponsor a discussion series on anti-racist pedagogy. So when my co-facilitator, Sam Osina, and I sent out this invitation in August, we thought success would look like maybe having 25 or 30 instructors come forward and be interested in joining us. So we were unprepared for over 100 instructors coming forward and expressing interest in joining us. And so you can see from the get-go how a partnership can expand the reach and increase the draw for these kinds of events. So in my brief time with you here today, I'm going to start just by clarifying some concepts that we used to frame our series. I'll give a short overview of our approach and share some resources that I hope you'll find useful, helpful. And then I'll give you some of the takeaways that our participants noted as highlights of the year. So next slide, please. So the place where we started was making sure that we were all on the same page in noting a distinction between anti-racist pedagogy and anti-racist teaching. That anti-racist teaching is a very specific focus on course content, whereas anti-racist pedagogy is a larger umbrella that encompasses teaching methods that instructors, regardless of discipline or course content, can embrace in order to disrupt traditional pedagogical practices that can reinforce structural racism. So it was really important for us to note that we were about anti-racist pedagogy. So some folks felt like they didn't have a lot of control over the content that they needed to deliver or cover in their semesters. So next slide, please. So the other thing that we really wanted to start with and emphasize is that anti-racist pedagogy is a journey and not a destination. So it's a process. We all enter the process from a different place, and wherever you're entering it is the right place. The important thing is to jump in. And this was tough for a lot of faculty who have been trained to be experts in their discipline or experts in a field. And so we were really intentional about pointing out the way that this notion of expertise is really a manifestation of colonialism that reinforces hierarchy and power of those who know versus those who don't know. So important to start there because it reassured so many of our participants who identified themselves as real beginners in this process. So next slide, please. So just to give you a flavor of how we started this group, and I invite you all to participate in this activity to the extent to which you're comfortable, and that is to just think about your own educational experiences. So stretch your memory back to kindergarten and revisit the years that you spent in a classroom and consider the time that you felt most seen and valued in a classroom. because that's where it really starts. It needs to start. You're all talking about love, right? It starts in the heart. It starts with our feelings, because anti-racist pedagogy is really a way of making sure that all students feel seen and valued in a classroom. And so if you're thinking about this question, consider when that happened for you, why that happened, what did the teacher do or not do that allowed you to feel seen and valued. And if you're comfortable, just popping in the chat, where and when that happened. So it was maybe art class in 3rd grade, or maybe your 11th grade English teacher. But to think about being seen and valued and the way that that affects engagement and motivation, and ultimately, as we know, retention, right? Sticking the course and staying in the university. And what was really interesting in asking this question of our participants on our very first meeting together, some folks talked about disciplines that have nothing to do with what they're working in today. And then others said, I have never felt seen and valued in a classroom. And that was notable as well. And it was a powerful moment of the exchange of our stories. So this was just one way that we used questions to guide conversation. So next slide, please. So I share with you here a link to a Google Doc. You'll have all these slides after today. So in your leisure time, I invite you to look at this document, because Sam and I developed about 3.5 pages of really robust questions that looked at big issues, but then got into the nitty-gritty of course design, really asking folks to spend some time, thinking about their pedagogical practice. We really intentionally did not assign homework. We didn't have a book that guided us, because our emphasis really was on the co-creation of knowledge through conversation. So, we didn't want to pay homage to some one voice, some, big name out there, best-selling author or anything like that. We wanted to acknowledge the knowledge that we all carry within us, and that we could bring together and grow together in our really amazing, it turned out to be 4 cohorts, because we had so many people who were involved. But managing these kinds of conversations then really necessitated some deft facilitation. So next slide, please. I certainly could not have done it without having a partner. And Sam and I put together this document, again, that we share with you, some tips and tricks for those of you who are thinking about starting an anti-racist pedagogy group. We acknowledge some pitfalls that you might want to avoid falling into. And one of the things that we want to just acknowledge is how scary this work is, right? And the acknowledgement earlier that it's often alone. So having a partner really helps. And, the fear in the middle of the night, oh gosh, how's this conversation going to go? Or, oh, did I say the wrong thing? This is scary stuff. So again, we have some tips and tricks for you. And the first and foremost of which is just have a partner that you can really trust. So next slide. The thing that I really want to make sure I have time to share with you, though, are the takeaways that our participants shared. I coded the responses that we received just last week at our end of year evaluation. And folks gave us a lot of anonymous feedback on these Google forms. And as I coded them, I really noticed these 4 themes. So the theme of commitment, courage, compassion, and community. So here's what they had to say. So the first quote under commitment, people commented, and again, these kind of typify these themes, right? So this quote, I have a new sense of urgency about this work. I used to think it was important, but now it's more than that. Another person, before I was doing this kind of thing based on my intuition, This group gave me tools to more confidently practice anti-racist pedagogy and communicate to my colleagues why it matters. Courage. So someone said, I am now brave enough to deviate from how I have always taught and to let go of my perfectionism, which of course we know a lot of academics have. This work is too important to hold back out of fear of making mistakes. More on courage. We have, next quote. The real work here was deep and honest self-reflection, at times disheartening, but profoundly transformative. Compassion was overwhelmingly about seeing things from students' perspectives, striving to meet them where they are, the assets that students have. And then finally, the community, the encouragement found in this group and appreciation for colleagues in other disciplines. And so this is just one thing about the partnerships and the power to be found therein. And there's just one thing more, final slide, which is the fact that we started with a call in August and we're ending with a celebration. So again, a partnership between CEDL and the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for this showcase where 18 of our participants will be sharing what they tried, how they changed their pedagogy, and the impact it had on students. There we go. Those are my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Canfield. I just appreciate that participatory, facilitated dialogue approach, because it's important to have that when we're dealing with such very important and sensitive topics. So thank you for your due diligence. Thank you for that style. Greatly appreciate it. And I'm sure our campus community does too. And community, if you have any follow-up questions for Dr. Canfield, because of time, by all means, please drop them in the chat. We will make sure to do our best to follow up with you. And with that, it is my great pleasure to, again, take a moment, stretch break, deep breath, everyone, because I know it's a lot of information, but it's a sheer reflection of the passion and commitment we have at UC Merced. So without further ado, I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jorge Arroyo.
Good morning, everyone. As Cynthia mentioned, my name is Jorge. I'm the director of our Undergraduate Research Opportunities Center. And as others have already mentioned, we go by the acronym UROC. So our students are part of our UROC Scholars community. So I'm going to share a little bit about our programs and talk about our intentional work across the campus, and sharing hopefully what you all can see. Like, it's very intentional work, as everybody's mentioning today, but it's very loving and prideful work. So next slide. This is our mission for our campus office. We started in way before our actual naming of our office in spring 2014. We had a couple of undergraduate research programs, which are considered fellowships across the UC system, but they were not as part of an office. They were more of an outreach and recruitment programs that were kind of decentralized. So in spring 2014, the Office of UROC became a reality. Unfortunately, I cannot take responsibility for the naming of the office. I wish I could, but that was my predecessor, and also our previous Vice Provost and Dean for Undergraduate Education. So one of the things that we highlight is undergraduate research is considered one of the high impact practices in higher education, particularly for students who are from first generation college, underrepresented minority or minoritized backgrounds, and particularly for students who may not have the support or understanding of what higher education is. So to start, just to kind of give you a taste of what we do, we practice vulnerability and honesty in our programs to create a sense of community with our students. So for those of you, I usually share with my students that when I was an undergraduate student at UC Santa Barbara, I had no idea what graduate school was, and I definitely did not understand the PhD application process. So by show of reaction, raise of hand, how many of you did not know the PhD program or higher education grad school pathway? Right. So one of the things that we really focus on is engaging students in this really intentional work around their interests. So although we really focus on it for students to conduct research in our programs, we are not the only office on our campus that does this, or the only pathway for students to engage in research. But we are one of the main offices, particularly around the number of fellowships we offer our students. And we have specific ones that are in STEM disciplines, is where our programs initially started. But definitely we are excited that we've been able to expand to all academic disciplines on the campus with a lot of support from different departments, and then also a lot of interaction with faculty. Our programs are targeted towards rising juniors and seniors, but we do encourage all students to start considering research once they get to campus. A lot of our development has been through support of our provost, Greg, who is on here, and he introduced himself earlier. That undergraduate research is a continuing opportunity for students at UC Merced and will continue to be a hallmark of our baccalaureate degree. So all students will get experiential learning, and we hope that they at least consider partially participating in undergraduate research. And again, we are just one of the offices that we support students getting that experience. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into too much depth here. These are the number of our programs that we offer in our office. And you can see this, we try to do intentional training of our students about what this looks like and how they get involved in research. But all of our programs participate in our Summer Undergraduate Research Institute, also known as SURI. Again, we like acronyms. So SURI is a 9-week institute where students get familiar with research. So they take on a faculty mentored research project, working directly with grad students, postdocs, and their faculty. So it's not, in a chemistry lab, they're cleaning beakers, or in a, sociology, they're just, transcribing interviews. They are conducting the work themselves, from creating research questions through the process of analysis and presentation. So we have several opportunities for students to engage in that work. We do emphasize PhD pathways. As I mentioned, I didn't understand what PhD even meant or necessarily how to get there. And so we talk to our students very openly and honestly about that. And we try to not tell them from a deficit perspective that you didn't come here with this understanding, is that there's hidden curriculum, particularly in higher education. And for first generation college students, minoritized students, low income background, that I explicitly tell my students, I had no idea what this was. And so we trying to find ways throughout the summer with intentional workshops that cover some of the ins and outs of the process, but we also pay our students stipends during the summer so that they are fully funded to really engage in this work. So next slide, please. So how do we do this? Intentional conversations from the recruitment process and our application all the way through to the time that they're leaving, understanding what research is, how do they apply. We structure it off of the grad admissions process. So they have to get one letter recommendation, personal statement, essays, and that goes all the way through direct guidance, one-on-one with our staff as they're going through the application process to submit, that they are getting some conversation. So it's not, how do I understand this, or how do I pick programs? How do I find faculty at other campuses? And so we do that intentional work with support from different offices on campus. So we recruit through a couple of organizations that are for student groups, SACNAS, the Society for Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, as well as some different offices on campuses, TRV, which is our Transfer, Returning, and Veteran Services Office, Services for Undocumented Students, and just different ways that we know that we need to target students specifically to get this opportunity. Next slide. So how are we doing it? Is it, serving the need of our students? You'll see that our data is matching the campus population. So 70% of students identified as URM, and 73% of them identified as first generation college student. So you'll see over the years, and we're still, backlogged a little bit because of pandemic and all of our stuff, but we are matching the population of our student campus, or our demographics on campus. I will also take a note, NSF, our National Science Foundation funding, does require US citizenship or citizen or permanent resident status. So thankfully we are able to then have our other programs support students who are undocumented, who don't fall under the URM status, so underrepresented minority. So those categories that are specific to NSF funding or federal funding. So we thankfully have a lot of opportunities to support students in other areas. And I wanted to mention, again, we work very closely with the different offices on campus, such as advising staff and ensuring that students are aware of these opportunities. Next slide. And again, this is probably how does it break down? URM is a big population of students that can fall into these categories. So I wanted to show this, our 2020 scholars. This is their self-reported race, again, using the categories that are kind of, census driven, not necessarily how we like to identify. We also capture their ethnicities as well, but for the sake of having a nice data sets for you all to view. These are their self-reported race categories. And again, it's matching the population of our campus and the demographics that we have on at UC Merced. The challenge you'll see is that, some of those percentages, yeah, that's great that you have some of that, but what does it come out to? One student that is identified as Native American. Like we're very intentionally trying to collaborate with folks on campus to get that population support, but we still have work to do. Next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to leave you all with is some of the outcomes that we have. Our students are going to graduate school at a higher rate than what's happening on campus. That data is going to happen. Hopefully I can work with Cynthia and Wendy on that and getting better result data. But these are some of the quotes from our students. It is serving the need of our students, and it's giving them the different areas of development that we know is important. Competence in their academic discipline, understanding the process, as well as working independently. And so we know that it's working. One of the things that we're trying to do is, this is a very small population of our students on campus. I have about 100 students that participate in Surrey every summer. So we are definitely trying to expand opportunities and get more students aware of these pathways so that more of them go to grad school. And so next slide. These are some of our graduating scholars, just so you all can see. This is some of our contact information on our website. Overall, our students are saying they are more confident after Surrey to participate in the pathway, applying to grad school, understanding the process, and feeling more confident that they can now go after opportunities. And we will promote them and support them in other areas as well. It's not just our programs. That's it. This is some of the outcomes data from campus, and this is where we're hoping the next steps that we would have the UROC outcomes. We know that they are going to grad school. The students that are participating in our programs are applying and enrolling and getting accepted to great programs. But these are just some of the outcomes for the campus.
And phenomenal work that you're doing, Dr. Arroyo, for our campus community. It's so vital that we have access to those research opportunities, not only for our undergraduate student body, which you've mentioned the demographics, right? First generation, minority institution, and to be able to provide so many different opportunities in a culturally responsive way, in a way that's aware of how do we bridge and make sure that we are a student-centered university, in addition to showing the assessment work that you've done. I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. For our community, feel free to drop any questions in the chat, but I do want to provide space for our provost to, I see your hand raised, by all means, chime in.
I just wanted to say that when I'm out talking about our university, this to me is our signature program for our undergraduates. We are having our students complete PhDs at a rate that's second in the UC system behind Berkeley. And we are #1 by far in academic master's completions. Now, you think about how long it takes to complete a doctorate. The fact that we're #2 is amazing, because a lot of those masters are in PhD programs, right? They're on their way. And that's because it's not just Jorge, although he does a phenomenal job. Our faculty as a whole is committed to changing the face of the professoriate. We are creating pathways from other HSIs, from HBCUs, and even from colleges that have a high percentage of Native Americans to be the destination for doctorates for those students. And we are working very hard to have our undergraduate students be to be destined for graduate work in other elite universities. So this is a core of our mission. It's not just for today. And we hear people complain constantly about, oh, well, there just aren't enough minorities with PhDs, so how can we diversify? We're doing that work right now.
I love it. Thank you so much for elevating that. And thank you, Jorge, again for your presentation. Community, how are we feeling? Pulse check. How's the energy? Y'all ready for more? We have a couple more presenters and a space to reflect. So here we go. With great excitement, I want to introduce Dr. Nigel de Juan Haddon to provide us our overview of equity as the beautiful and the just. Thank you, Dr. Haddon, for joining us today. And by all means, take the stage.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It is an extreme pleasure to be here on a Friday with professionals who have chosen to be here on a Friday to discuss diversity. I'm grateful for that. I want to talk about, as the title, Equity is the Beautiful and the Just, and to talk about the ways in which I intersect with the DEI office from the perspective of a faculty member. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. It's a little bit quiet. Do you think we can project a little bit louder for our volume? We can hear you nice and clear. No, thank you.
Let me see if I have the, hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, Dr.
Yes,
Haddon.
we can hear you now.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was trying to say how grateful I was to be here on a Friday with people who want to talk diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I was very grateful for that. My title there, Equity is the Beautiful and the Just. The next slide is one in which I point to some places within the university mission that I like to intersect with as I think about my work as a faculty member, and one on our campus at UC Merced who is thinking about equity and justice. And there are parts of the mission where it says that under mission, in that first paragraph, it says, as a key tenet in carrying out this mission, UC Merced promotes and celebrates the diversity of all members of its community. And then in the last paragraph, there's a very key section in which it says UC Merced celebrates its location in the San Joaquin Valley, reflecting the poetry of its landscape, history, resources, and diverse cultures, while capitalizing on and expanding the valley's connections to the emerging global society. So in the mission statement, you can see the very places where diversity and equity and inclusion are a demand or a mandate of the university. And so the next slide, please. And what I like to do within my own work is to think about locating the self. And of course, for us, that means thinking about where we work on the University of Merced campus, a campus that belongs on the land of the indigenous, the Yokuts and the Miwok, who understand the earth as a place for everyone. So that's important. But when I think about equity and this notion of the beautiful and the just, if in this slide, you can see our beautiful campus that many of us are waiting to return to. But then you can see to the left, what I would understand is the unjust, right? And that's what is 30 miles away from our campus, and that's the largest women's prison in the world. And so when I think about the mission of our university, and I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then I think about what it means to be a faculty member at this university, one has to think about that balance or that imbalance of the just and the unjust, and what it means for what one's work has to entail. So next slide. And for me, my teaching is very much centered in thinking about that notion of the just and the unjust. So courses such as human rights and literature, and then post-colonial, postmodern, and post-war literature. So in the very teaching that we do, we think about how you embed or incorporate the equity, inclusion, and diversity. Next slide. And then it also occurs within the work of service, which is a lot of our jobs as faculty entails service. And as part of that, you find yourself on committees where you can impact everything from the curriculum, right? You can impact how what gets approved in terms of research protocols. You can advise students. And so in all of these committees, one has to be thinking about this notion of equity. And what I recommend is that one pitches it in terms of the just and the unjust. And so when you think about diversity in those ways, if one is to reject the argument of diversity, this could be seen as unjust. And so human rights frameworks, social justice frameworks give one the ability to see diversity, equity, inclusion in work as not merely something residing within the labels, but is actually a matter of social justice and human rights. So here within the committees that I work on, always thinking from this perspective. Next slide. And then it comes back to this notion of locating the self. What is it about our campus, which is beautiful, but is located 30 minutes away from something that isn't so beautiful, which is the largest women's prison in the world? I talked to a warden once, and for her, she says, it's very difficult for her to think of women as prisoners. And because the women who were in this facility, if you compared their crimes to those of women in other democracies, prison would not have been the place that they were placed. So if you think about equity, inclusion, a research university in the San Joaquin Valley, and if you think about those words within our mission statement, we have an obligation to take what is the just or the beautiful, which is our campus, and to figure out ways to impact what is the unjust or the ugly. And if you think about this in the context of our students, right? When I teach my courses, one of the biggest requests is that students want to talk about the prisons that are surrounding our campus. They want to talk about how they can use what is the just or the beautiful within their work to think about the unjust. Within my work, right, I am teaching also inside of those facilities, and so that becomes part of a way to address the unjust and making that connection between the campus and those institutions that surround us. Next slide. And so you can use the resources of the campus to impact what is happening in the real world, and you can have students involved in this kind of work. Next slide. And I keep returning to this slide because I want to talk about that locating the self and that imbalance or the kind of paradox or and so when we get to the end of the presentation, I'll have a sort of a query for us to think about. Here's a passage that comes from a book called The Wounded Storyteller, and it talks about this notion of spaceship ethics. And it talks about people who are doing work in places where there's great injustice. And so when there's imbalance or there's inequity or there's inequality, and our university finding itself placed in one of those parts of the state and the world, it talks about this notion of moving away from what is spaceship ethics. The idea that I fly into this place and that I do my work and then I leave this place. So to resist spaceship ethics is to actually think about the ways in which when you come in, you are doing the work that is having you locating the self within the region and the space in which you find yourself. So part of locating the self and resisting this spaceship ethics. The other part is here, thinking about someone like Baldwin, finding a way that within this diversity work or equity and inclusion, whether it's working with faculty, whether it's working with staff, working within organizations, that sometimes you will have to resist or come up against great challenges. And when you do that, that one starts to think about one's own moral center. And this is a great passage from Baldwin about trusting your own moral center as you engage in this work. Next slide. The other part, right, is that we think about the kind of inequities that surround us, but to do that work solely to find yourself, what Kierkegaard is saying is thinking into the suffering of another as a comfort, so as to make oneself feel good about oneself, is the wrong way to do this, right? But one must think about this kind of work as something that you do because it is, right, it is the humane and just thing to do. So, next slide. And here's where I think how I want to understand diversity, equity, inclusion. That diversity, equity, and inclusion is the perpetuation of beauty. That instead of being made to think about the terms themselves solely within the ways in which we find them in dictionary or sort of codified in certain types of terms, one, to think about it as the perpetuation of beauty. That when you are doing this work as the perpetuation of beauty, our university and diversity work and equity inclusion on our university is going to spread across the valley, right? And that in those places of injustice, they'll be taken over by the very perpetuation of this beauty, which is the work of DEI on our campus. Next slide. And so, right, that slide of, it can be unsettling for some. He's placed the prison next to the university. Why is he doing that? To talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. Doesn't he just, and besides, doesn't he just teach literature in the classroom? What's going on here? Go back to our mission statement and think about our mission statement, and then understand that placing the university in the middle of injustice is beautiful, right? So that when you place the university in the middle of injustice, that is beauty. And that is how I want us to understand equity as the beautiful and the just. In those other slides, if we had more time and we could have a seminar, I'd sort of break into those, but we'll leave that for now.
I just want to say what Dr. Haddon shared today is just a preview, a glimpse of the intellectual richness at UC Merced. I know because of time, we don't have the opportunity to take that in-depth dive into this work and really thinking deeply about the different ways to understand it, integrating this notion of beauty and poetry and how to make sense of this work on our campus, just a sheer reflection of the many nuggets of richness that we have here. And thank you for reminding us of our location in the San Joaquin Valley. That commitment to serve the region is part of our founding story. So as we think about some of the stories that we've heard to date, at this moment for the summit, the founding of an ED&I office to help support with the practices and policies. We've heard around anti-racist pedagogy and understanding those nuances between anti-racist teaching and thinking about those facilitated dialogues. We've understood the role of research for our undergraduate populations and really forecasting how to produce that next cadre of faculty from students, just like the students that attend UC Merced. And here Dr. Haddon takes it up another level, really asking for that deep critical assessment, not only in terms of the words of DEI work, but understanding the physicality and geographic nexus of our campus and everything surrounding us. And what does it mean to be an institution in the San Joaquin Valley? I just want to say extreme gratitude. Thank you so much. And when we have another opportunity, I want to be a part of that conversation and lecture to understand and really stretch my thinking. So in the sense of time, again, I apologize deeply, but community, if you have questions for Dr. Haddon regarding these very, very powerful ways of thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion within a higher ed setting, by all means, please ask. Thank you again, Dr. Haddon. So I want to take a quick moment for folks. I love to do pulse checks. I know I'm absolutely energized. I got my morning workout in, a cup of coffee, so I'm feeling fantastic. But I want to be mindful that sometimes we need a little bit of space, roll our shoulders, because we have our upcoming final speaker to really provide that full circle understanding of the work happening at UC Merced. So with great excitement, I would love to introduce Armando Contreras, coming from the Division of Student Affairs. So Armando, whenever you're ready, we're quite excited. Please let us understand the amazing efforts being done within your division and your office. So thank you, Armando, and by all means, take the stage.
Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate this space on a Friday morning. As I stated earlier, my name is Armando Contreras, and I serve as the Assistant Dean of Students in the Office of the Associate Vice Chancellor Dean of Students. My presentation today will really focus on the various EDI efforts that our office has undertaken this past academic year and the partnerships that we've created along the way. Specifically, I plan to highlight the various ways that we've created equitable and affirming learning environments for UC Merced students. Next slide. To better provide some context to the work that we do in the Dean of Students office, I wanted to start with this quote by Cesar Chavez that reads, "Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. We have seen the future and the future is ours." This quote appears in my office on campus and serves as a foundation for the way that I view social justice in student affairs. When I work with students, I do more than simply connect them to a resource. I provide students with tools and strategies to fight the daily racial injustices that impact their success at institutions of higher education. As a first-generation college student myself, I know firsthand that in order to truly provide equitable and affirming spaces for our students to thrive, we must teach them to unpack the hegemonic oppressions that exist on college campuses. Next slide, please. In the Dean of Students office, we advocate, we connect, and we actively create a culture of care. By utilizing the social justice lens and critical pedagogy, the work that we do in our office is intentional, and we actively involve various campus stakeholders to address concerns that students bring to us and encourage stakeholders to respond to those student concerns with an equitable mindset. For example, yesterday I met with a student who expressed concerns with the way a white faculty member responded to a question on a class assignment. The student was distraught, and they described the faculty member's response as hostile and aggressive. As a student of color, what he experienced was a microaggression. At that moment, the student didn't understand why that faculty member responded to him in that way. In that conversation, I was able to connect what he was experiencing to put words into or strategies into how to address those microaggressions, as the majority of our students who have never experienced these type of experiences in a college campus don't know what to do. So I wanted to provide him specific strategies on what he was feeling and put specific steps in place so that he can actively take ownership to his experience. And that's just a snippet of my daily experiences with students on our campus. Next slide. Through the following slides, I plan to go over some of the most notable concerns that our students have faced this past academic year, the resources we've developed to address those concerns, the partnerships we've created, and the current EDI initiatives we've had this past year. Next slide. As we all know, COVID has impacted college students across the nation. Students of color and other marginalized students have been impacted more significantly. From the most recent counseling and psychological services data that our department put together, the anxiety has been the most notable diagnostic concern. Many students are taking courses at home while also being involved in family and close relationships that have impacted their academics. Students have reported missing genuine connections and feelings of exhaustion and stress. In a recent equity and mental health framework report done by the Jet Foundation and Steve Fund, researchers found that students of color are more likely to report feeling isolated and less likely to report their campus is inclusive than white students. In order to move this work forward, we must use data and assessment that we've collected to address those specific concerns. Next slide. One initiative that was piloted by Dr. Gonzalez in the Counseling and Psychological Services and her staff, and in collaboration with our office, this past year was the Black Girl Doctor Network that conducted a mental health wellness assessment on Black scholars. One notable finding was that 100% of the participants indicated that they do not feel that UC Merced is a safe space to show up as their authentic selves without fear of repercussions. As such, the report findings recommended that activities, initiatives focus on healing circles, allyship trainings, Black and faculty and staff assessments are needed. So what this tells me as an educator is that our students have a voice, and that in order to do equity work that truly matters, we must listen to our students. Next slide. During the fall 2020 semester, our office held a student forum with the intention of hearing student voices to identify what are the main concerns that they're struggling with during the pandemic. Aside from the concerns that I've already shared before, the most notable things that came out of that forum was that students want to be heard. They wanted a voice and a space to hear out what they're listening. A lot of the feedback that we received were that students wanted more spaces like this where they can come and speak to senior leadership about the concerns that they're having, so then we can use those voices and uplift them to senior leadership to say, this is what we need to do to move things forward. Next slide. As a result of these surveys, our campus has developed and promoted specific resources with our students in mind. And thinking about the increasing mental health and wellness, our campus is partnered with the Jet Foundation to provide a strategic and mental health wellness plan that's going to move this work forward. Last week, the Healthy Mind Survey was sent out to students to really capture what students are struggling with. Through the partnership of the Office of Social Justice Initiatives, we've developed radical healing circles and spaces to allow students to have space where they can identify how the mental health has specifically affected their struggles as communities of color. We've also provided emergency funding to students this past academic year that really focus on addressing the concerns that they're struggling with, as we know that COVID has significantly impacted our students of color the most. Next slide. Another initiative that came out of the pandemic was the creation of a reflection and healing garden. Well, we're planning, a faculty member approached us a couple of weeks ago, and she wanted us to really focus on identifying a space for students to find healing. So what we're going to be doing in the coming months is finding a space on campus where students can come together and find a space where they can heal. We're having a local artist come and design a space on campus that's going to be a permanent space for our campus. And so I'm moving things along because I'm running out of time. Next slide, please. And some of the initiatives that I think are important for us to focus on with these partnerships that we've created are these initiatives that really speak to the work that we're doing. The first one, just to highlight, is the Stories from Home. So we partner up with our faculty members to create a space for students to speak about their experiences and create these photo narratives that shared experiences that students are sharing. The second initiative is the expansion of our multicultural center and our affinity spaces to really find how we can use space on our campus to address the concerns that students are facing. The third initiative is our #YUCM campaign, which really focuses on engaging students on our social media to find out what are things that they feel that inspires them to come to UC Merced. So at times of struggle, they can connect to those experiences as for them to move forward. And we already mentioned this, but the Free Speech Week that the EDI office put together this past February, we collaborated with them to present on what free speech means to our students, as we know that students really want to think about what free speech means on our campus. And the final initiative is the inaugural Black Research Fellowship that is happening later today, which brings, it's essentially bringing presenters to really focus on Black excellence and what research is really doing to provide resources to our students. Next slide. One other great partnership that we created was we brought Brandon Leak into our campus with partnership with the EDI office and the Chancellor's office, the Office of Student Involvement, to bring a notable figure to come speak to our students and provide inspiration on what it means to be a Black performer. And this partnership really speaks to kind of the great work that we're trying to do as we move forward. Next slide. As I close out this presentation, I know I went through this pretty quickly, but I wanted to close out with this quote from our Associate Vice Chancellor, Dean of Students, Dr. Jonathan Grady, that says, "These times bring about the opportunity for a transformative reset, an opportunity to address the systematic conditions of UC Merced that create injustice. We must not allow fear to cripple our ideas, crush our experiences, nor shall our successes. Growth is not found in comfort nor familiarity. We must all commit to learning and growing together and commit to fostering a mystic, resilient zone within our campuses where people face their consequences, repair relationships, build their resilience, and embody a growth, that loving mindset. Today and always, I thank you all for your unwavering commitment and send you all grace, peace, love, hope, and strength for endurance." As I close out, I want to just be mindful of the fact that all of the work that we do is very strategic and intentional to working with the EDI office to really leverage the resources across the campus to really make it stick. This work is not just on the shoulders of people of color anymore. It's really about the campus taking these initiatives seriously and leveraging it across the campus. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Armando. I always appreciate the opportunity to see what active listening and response looks like, especially when we think about the various needs that our students have, thinking about what they're living and dealing with their families, home community, how they experience campus, and having this intentional space to work with different staff and faculty on campus and generate the resources necessary to ensure that everyone thrives. That really came across in that presentation. Context, what are you experiencing? What conversations do we need to have? How can we best support you? So it's phenomenal, not only the work that the Division of Student Affairs is doing, but really showcasing the significant amount of partnerships that you have. So I just want to commend you. Thank you for allowing us to understand that unique approach and culture of care that you have underway. It's vital and critical for a campus like UC Merced to have that culture in place, and thinking about how do the rest of us also support and augment that work. So definitely thank you. Community, if you have questions for Armando, by all means, drop them in the chat. More than happy to follow up. And I just have to say, I really appreciate all of our presenters today. My hope and deepest intent for everyone here is to understand the sheer scope that we have here at UC Merced. We know that there's always opportunities to take a moment and reflect and step back and think, okay, where do we go from here, given all of these assets? What can we do? So with that, I hope that for everybody here is probably coming from a different space, a different interest. So one of the things we wanted to do today is support a breakout room opportunity. I know we've covered a significant amount of ground. I know we've talked about not only the journey of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with our Associate Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer, Dania Matos, but also thinking about the unique role everyone on campus is playing. So you can tell we're not all doing the same work, but we're all driven by the value of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So as you've heard all this and you begin this process moment, we're gonna break everyone out into groups. And I hope that you introduce yourself. What brought you to this space, right? Based off of what you've heard, do you have any major takeaways? Something that's top of mind that's just mulling over, or something that you're amazed about, or you just have intense curiosity on? So it's really a space to process, a space to share, and just what we would do if we had our circle tables on campus. But this breakout room is really about, so what did you see? What did you hear? So our colleague and equity and justice analyst, Wendy Puquira, is going to support that work. So Wendy, by all means, let us know and guide us through how to best do that.
All right, everyone. So I'm going to break everybody out. There's going to be about 6 to 7 participants per room. And we appreciate you being here and engaging. So I'm going to create the rooms now.
Everybody is here now? Yes, everybody is back.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that breakout session was useful and you found a place to reflect. And as such, I was hoping that some of y'all would feel comfortable sharing some of the conversations that you had with the rest of the group, just to gauge like where we were at, what were we reflecting on. So feel free to chime in or raise your hand and we'll let you take the mic.
I can go ahead. I'm Ray Plaza, Director in the Office for Diversity and Inclusion at Santa Clara University and Vice Chair for the NADOHE CDE group, group here with Mary. I think for us, one of the things we ended with, one of the things we've been talking about is, what does the reorientation back to campus look like in the fall? Not only for our students, but also our faculty and staff, because in some ways, we've all been dealing with all this trauma. And what does that mean when we come back and have to heal and really process everything that, because I suspect we're all exhausted on so many levels, and, you know, and we can't go back to what it was. And so what does this reimagining, reorientation, reframing look like? And so I suspect that will just add further work to already our full plates. So what does it mean? So I just want to put that out there.
Yes, that is wonderful. I do suspect that it'll be a lot more work for us, but something that we talked about, Maria and I, while we were waiting for y'all to come back, was the importance of community. And I think that's been highlighted throughout today at everybody's presentations, and how this is like a work of love. And often, at least for me, that is where my cup is filled and I'm able to continue the work. Dr. Canfield, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you said, Ray, and one of the things that I was astonished by was how much more participation we got from faculty because our meetings were Zoom. I really think that had we insisted on campus face-to-face sessions, like, I don't think we would have had I mean, maybe we would have had the interest, but I don't think we would have had the sustained attendance that we had. So I think that's something for us to think about, those of us who do that kind of outreach, is even though it doesn't feel as personal, I think that maybe there's greater access for, at least for faculty to who don't always, come to campus every day, if we have things virtually. Just
yeah, that's an excellent point. I'm fairly new, right, to campus. I've only been here about a month, but it has been really exciting to see how much interest we do generate and how many staff and faculty do come to our events, right? So that is something I think to keep in mind, is how do we, as we're moving forward, does that mean a hybridization of events, in person and virtual, and kind of reimagining what that might look like on our end, on the business end of things? How do we create and sustain this level of access and engagement with folks that may not always be on campus or may not feel safe going to campus just yet? Anyone else?
Go, Wendy, really quickly. For anybody who knows, I'm really, really passionate about staff issues. So every time I talk about, I like to bring back the conversation to staff. And what I was mentioning in our group was, I wish maybe we, how we talk about care for students or protections for faculty or training for faculty. I wish we had more opportunities for staff in many of the things that we do. Like I was telling the group, students, if you ask who's always helpful to them, the things they could probably name more staff than they can name faculty, right? So staff also play a huge role in overall development and experiences of students. So how can those who are not maybe in student affairs, how can we all get better training and more training to help our students? And I was also saying that maybe we need more interactions with faculty to share experiences of, I think they're similar in interests sometimes that we have, or just learning our experiences so that they can also better advocate for us, because faculty have more protections than staff, right? So I think for me, those were important. We were just talking about. Then also like the difference between represented and policy covered staff. I was explaining how Guillermo Rivas, who was one of our custodial staff who received an award, couldn't get the cash prize that went along with because he belonged to a policy, he belonged to a union. So how can we give honor and recognition to the people who are working hard? So we were just talking about those things. But I always, for me, staff is, because I'm staff, that's the experience I have. And that's how I live and experience higher ed. I always would like to bring back the conversations to staff. People probably already know that about me, but staff always is on my mind.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And I'm glad you shared that perspective today, right? That oftentimes, especially in higher ed, right, the backbone of this university, the people who make it run as the staff. And so we do our best to ensure that our students and our faculty are having as smooth of an experience as they can so they can carry on the mission of the university.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. And I think I want to follow with what Priya was just mentioning, and we're having this conversation in our small group. Yesenia, Latrice, who are also on the call, they serve as our co-chairs for our Staff and Faculty of Color Association, and I'm part of the board as well. And I think one of the things that is important is while we're doing this work, like you said, for students and trainings for faculty members, some of us take double roles in supporting our students and supporting our faculty, and also we're kind of developing ourselves to be the voices of staff concerns on our campus, specifically for staff of color. So I think what's important is how do we, and to Priya's point, how do we champion the people that are doing this work and elevate them so that the entire campus is aware that we have to always remember about staff. There's a lot of, like you said, protections for students and faculty, and staff are the ones that are mostly overworked and have a lot on their plate to consider. And something I also want to mention is that, prior to the EDI office coming to fruition, a lot of the work that was done on diversity work was put on the backs of marginalized and people of color to do this work kind of pro bono. And I have to be mindful to mention that, because that was, I've been here for 6.5 years, and that work was being done by small group of champions on this campus, and most of them were people of color, to do this work on top of the work that we already are doing. So I think now that we're here, where the EDI office has really come to full circle, as Dania mentioned, is how now that it's more weaved into everything we do, yes, let's champion it, let's make sense of it, and it's more leverage across the entire campus. But how do we continue that and also continue to celebrate the staff that were putting that work a long time ago? I think we have to make sure that we make to mention that and celebrate that, because that's why we're here, right? So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Excellent point. I agree. It didn't occur to me until I became staff at a university, right? I've been in higher ed for a long time as a student, as a graduate student. Graduate coursework is a lot. But yeah, I as a student, I never necessarily had access to the staff or knew what staff were involved with. And so I applaud, our fearless leader, Dania Matos, for creating these spaces where we get to do this and kind of start these conversations off and kind of work together to figure out how do we continue and sustain this kind of engagement and effort to celebrate all of our partnering champions across campus. So I appreciate you all for being here and like sharing all your thoughts. It's very inspiring to be surrounded by our community, right? So I'm really grateful that you all are here. Cynthia, do you wanna share?
Thank you, Wendy, so much for supporting the debrief of our breakout rooms. We hope that the conversations were amazing, rewarding, inspired additional thinking as you return back to the spaces you navigate in. And we're almost towards the end of our summit, but we did not want to leave you without forecasting what the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and at large our campus community is considering as we enter the next academic year. So I'm going to share a few slides, and then I'm going to turn it back to our Associate Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer, Dania Matos, to close this beautiful space. So give me one quick second to share the screen. Please confirm that y'all can see it. Excellent. Thank you, Wendy. So to close off the NADOHE Summit for this year, the theme revolving are different things that keep on emerging are this idea of inclusive excellence, this idea of founding an office with complete intentionality and being very strategic about how we build out an office. So when Dania arrived, it was a party of one. What does it mean to build it out and staff that office? What does it mean to establish the core programming that will reoccur on a yearly basis? What does it mean to look at not only our UC partners, sister campuses, but other campuses in the Northern California region to help us develop a deeper capacity to do this work and that creative thinking that comes through implementation. So what I'm going to do is walk through a little bit more and just recall the strategies and talk about how we're approaching the equity and justice strategic planning process. So as you heard in the beginning of our presentation, it was important for us to understand our campus needs. Historical, you heard right now at the debrief, the role our staff has played. You've heard during the presentations, the role our faculty is playing. And all in all, the theme that's emerging from there is who are the champions? Who are the leaders that are doing this work? And while we have structured opportunities, whether they're the listening tour, our virtual lunch and learn and dialogue series, or our committees, advisories, and task forces that are strategizing to push this work forward, all in all, doing this through a love-based approach is reflective in our commitment to swift mobilization. So we want to be responsive, but also aware of our history. Continuing in that work by listening carefully to what our campus needs, it's the intentionality of the initiatives. And recall that our vision statement centralizes people first, you as a person, right? How do we navigate a university setting? So the variety of initiatives that have come out of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the work coming out through our different departments, units, and divisions really remind us that it's important to center people, because the EDI outcomes, whether it's around compositional diversity, who makes our faculty, students, and staff, whether it's about campus climate, how are we experiencing our moments on campus and off campus, or whether it's about infrastructure and capacity to do this work, it all requires that we center people. And the third major strategy that I want to recap is partnerships. There's a reason why we wanted to ensure that you were able to listen to some of our key leaders on campus to talk about the different opportunities and the way they're being tailored to faculty, students, and staff. This summarizes and is definitely not comprehensive of the different spaces we're able to dabble in. But I think the main point to really emphasize time and time again, it can be very exhausting to have the responsibility of diversity, equity, justice, inclusion fall on one person, fall on one unit. And so this idea of distributive responsibility is imperative, and we hope to continue on that. So as we approach strategic planning, we know that these are the major strategies employed. We recall a lot of the intentionality that Dania has put forth. So as we think about what does it mean to take this to the next level, how do we organize it? It means that we're looking at an incoming equity and justice strategic planning process. So let me walk you through a little bit through that. So when it comes to this work, and I'm going to echo back to our listening tour that took place, we heard different themes that revolve around what our campus needs and wants. So we heard conversations. It was captured via either quantitative methods or qualitative methods around the experience of breaches of trust, the experience of feeling a lack of response or support, of feeling or experiencing inclusion in some shape or form, or thinking about how do we bridge this relationship between what happens on campus and outside of campus, right? And these major concerns are echoing from different faculty and staff, and where possible, we include the student voice in that. Our institutional research unit allows us to understand some high-level questions through the data and what patterns we see. So it's important to ground all of our work in what evidence do we have at hand, what data do we wish we have, but perhaps we do not have access to, right? And that's okay at this moment, because it requires an understanding of what are the assets that we have at hand. Today's summit reflects those assets. What are some gaps that we have, right? What are those opportunities, and what can we do to advance it? So being data grounded and informed will become pivotal as you take stock and think about our strategic planning process. I'm very happy to report that right now we're in the midst of gathering feedback for a university-wide strategic plan. One of the goals there explicitly looks at how do we cultivate and celebrate diversity for everyone here. Some of the things that I've been able to understand and listen to would be equity related data. How does the data capture it? How do we look at healing and repair for people first? And the role of advocacy and leadership to ensure we're transforming the institution in a way that we'd like. So when we recruit our EDI champions, right, as part of that process, as we think about how the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion can manage that process, right, to attain the wins we want to see collectively derived, again, following the rhythm that Danya established, feedback loops, stay responsive and stay relevant. So incoming in the summer, we hope to provide the opportunity to engage our campus and set the founding groundwork to embark on what are the goals we want to see with equity, diversity, and inclusion by target population and the key metrics that support that assessment and decision making. So at large, it's so important for us to unite everyone. Again, this slide just captures some of the observations we already have in-house. We understand our position as a newer office, right? Roughly about 2 years old, but we have a strong and compelling commitment to understand that if we can unite and elevate everyone's work the way we've done today at the summit, then in this unity and in this strategic alignment, we expect to see some notable gains, reduction, or holding steady of EDI concerns. So with that, I always like to show the graphic, Daniel Stufflebean's SIT models, context, input, process, product. I'm a trained evaluator, so I like to think about a lot of these things with these frameworks, but hopefully we can start embarking on our context. Again, a lot of the work today reflects the work being done by different folks. We have some data, but there's still more conversations to be held. There's still more goal setting to be had, and thinking about how do we implement this and how do we take a moment, step back and reflect to assess. So with that, hopefully you are as excited as I am, but I do want to take the opportunity to just say thank you, be on the lookout for some of our next steps. And I want to pass it back to our Associate Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer, Danya Matos.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you so much, all of you. Time flies when you're having fun, and it sure did this Friday. I'm deeply reflective about sort of what we talked today and the journey we've been on together. I want to say that I always talk about leave people in places better than you found them, because inevitably they leave you, and each of you has left us better, and you are part of our UC Merced family. That means don't hesitate to reach out when things are good and when things are bad, because we are in the middle of this injustice together. And so I wanted to share a piece I wrote when I first entered higher ed, back when I had the time to be creative. But here it goes. The role of higher ed administrator is new for me, and so is the role I'm in. I'm the first to hold it. It's new for my family too, and once again, I'm the first to navigate it. I walk into spaces of being the only one, wondering if I could say certain things, but my social justice being core and upbringing have always called me to speak, shout, and never let the inner dialogue stay within. I've come home countless times to sit my family down to prepare them for a job lost for what I believe in. Yet my worry is met with pure love. Their answer is always the same. You stand up for what's right. You create the room for people to speak for themselves, because that is who you are and that is who we love. We will be all right. And so I speak because to speak is to love, and to fight is the purest of them all. And so I leave you with that fight, that form of pure love, that quilt that we're weaving together in the middle of this injustice. We walk through courage, commitment, compassion, and community. We walk through the perpetuating beauty in this love work. So please know you are loved, you are amazing, you are special, You are important, and we have your back. So thank you so much for allowing us to do this inaugural NADOHE Northern California Summit. We love you, and we hope to see you again soon on our campus or beyond. I like to sort of end with a little something someone taught me. Now that we're in these Zoom boxes, you can give folks high fives at the top, high fives on the side, and high fives below. So high five, touch the box next to you. There you go. Thank you so much. We love you with our UC Merced BobCAT heart, blue and gold.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.